Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat, and I'm honored on this episode to be joined by Dr. Lee Cohen. He is going to be talking with us about a new documentary that he created and produced called More Than Blue. And it is an important one for many reasons. And you'll hear why as we talk through how he came about this idea and his process of making this documentary and his hopes for how this documentary can help spread awareness about perinatal mental health conditions, and equally as important, let people know that treatment is available and that they can get back to being themselves. Dr. Cohen is the director of the Amon Pinizotto Center for Women's Mental Health and associate chief of psychiatry for philanthropy and departmental communications at Mass General Hospital, and the Edmund and Carol Carpenter Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He is a national and international leader in the field of women's mental health and was among the founders of the field of perinatal and reproductive psychiatry. His work spans the domains of research, teaching, and clinical care in the area of treatment of mood and anxiety disorders, with a subspecialty in psychiatric disorders associated with female reproductive function. After residency at MGH, Dr. Cohen completed a fellowship in psychopharmacology with a specific emphasis in reproductive pharmacology, and then founded the Center for Women's Mental Health at MGH. The program has expanded over the last 2 decades and now includes junior and senior faculty, research fellows, and residents from the psychiatry residency training program at MGH. Dr. Cohen has authored or co-authored more than 350 articles, abstracts, and book chapters. His articles have been published in leading medical journals, including American Journal of Psychiatry, Journal of American Medical Association, and JAMA Psychiatry. His publication on the risk of using antidepressants during pregnancy received the Clinical Research Achievement Award, which recognizes the top 10 most informative research papers in the year's scientific literature. Dr. Cohen has received many awards, including the Maternal Mental Health Hero Award in recognition of his leadership and commitment to closing the gaps in postpartum psychosis treatment in the United States. Dr. Cohen has served in many ways on the national level through the NIH, through the Department of Veteran Affairs, and through the World Health Organization. And I'm so excited for you guys to join in on this conversation. So let's dive in and meet Dr. Lee Cohen. Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for inviting me, Kat.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you for multiple reasons. You are one of the foundational folks in perinatal mental health, really making this a specialty, making it important, making sure people pay attention. And obviously, you've done a lot in the field. But I would love for people to get to know a little bit of your kind of origin story, if you will, in the perinatal mental health space and how you founded the program at Mass General.
Sure. To confess, it was a long time ago. It was over 30 years ago, and there was very little being done in the area of perinatal mental health. And we were struck, actually having trained in psychiatry at Mass General and having gone on to do a fellowship in psychopharmacology. It was such an interesting time. And what we were learning was that for men and women who had recurrent problems with mood or anxiety, that medicines that got them well, if they were stopped, that their return of symptoms would occur relatively quickly. And as we were learning more about treating particularly mood and anxiety disorders and learning that many patients would be on these medicines for considerable amounts of time, women who wanted to go get pregnant had very little guidance as to what to do. And they were frequently told to just stop their medicines, or that there was so little known about the safety of those medicines. And that was the beginning for me. I started a really small service, a small consultation service at Mass General, to see if I and then a few other people could work with patients, figuring out the safest way to navigate while they were trying to get pregnant or during pregnancy, and then ultimately postpartum. And that was the beginning of our women's mental health program. And then we started to study what happened to patients across pregnancy, across the postpartum period. Were there particular patients who were at highest risk for getting ill if they stopped a medicine, if they continued medicine? What about patients who didn't want to be on medicines? Were there non-pharmacologic psychotherapies that would be effective in keeping women? If you asked me, Kat, in 3 decades plus of taking care of patients who've come to see us in our clinics, what's been the most important message or the most important lesson? It would be that at the end of the day, nothing is more important than keeping women emotionally well before, during, and after pregnancy.
Man, yeah, I really hope everybody can hear that. I agree with you 100% and with your understanding of this specialty, the need for the care for women in the reproductive phase. You've seen the trajectory of the field and where it is now, and I know we're way better off where we were before, and there's still a long ways to go. But I have had that feeling too that if we can just get to everybody, make sure that they have the care that they need, it both can has the potential to help them obviously heal with they're going through now, potentially even help them heal from stuff that came before if they're getting really good help and treatment therapy, and be preventative and for their children and support their children's development. It's so critical. What you're saying is just, I agree with 1,000%.
Right? Nothing predicts how patients are going to do long term more than getting them well. And in our program, it's our guiding star that it's really important to configure a plan that will, if a patient wants to get pregnant, as an example, to configure the safest plan and that optimizes the likelihood that she will stay well during pregnancy and during the postpartum period. We know that nothing predicts postpartum depression more than mood during pregnancy. For us, getting patients well during pregnancy is key.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into it in a little bit about the documentary More Than Blue. It really touches on some of that in the documentary, which I'm so grateful that you guys took the care to make sure to share that as well. But we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, with the work that you're doing right now at Mass General, so you're a researcher, you're a clinician, and so you things from multiple angles, being able to support people individually and then being able to see things through studies, through the research and seeing things in a broader perspective. What have you seen in terms of, I don't know if trends is the right word, but how in terms of research and how much better are we in this field at understanding what is going on for women during this time? Like from when you first started this research.
When we started, just even starting with planning for pregnancy, there was very little in the literature guiding either the patient or the clinicians taking care of those patients about how to safely navigate pregnancy. I remember patients coming in and saying, I'll just stop whatever treatment got me well because I'll just white knuckle it
Mm,
and I'll manage. And what we learned over the years was that untreated depression had terrible sequelae, terrible outcomes for both moms and then down the road, their children, their families, their partnerships. So
yeah.
we have come so far in terms of appreciating how important it is to get patients well before, during, and after pregnancy. We've learned so much about how prevalent mood and anxiety disorders are during pregnancy and the postpartum period. And
Mhm,
we've also learned a lot in terms of the risk factors that really put patients at, in a way, greatest risk for developing problems during pregnancy and the postpartum period. Even going one step further, we've become very knowledgeable about how to get patients well. We have
mhm,
very effective treatments for managing mood, anxiety disorders during pregnancy, patients with bipolar disorder,
mhm,
patients with anxiety disorders, major depression. We are good at treating patients with both a combination of non-pharmacologic psychotherapies, psychiatric medications. We can do that safely. I think it takes a village in terms of partnering with our colleagues in the community who are running support groups for these patients. I don't think there's a magic bullet, but Kat, we have come so far in terms of our ability to meet patients where they are and to
mhm,
get them well. And I
mhm,
think if there's something that sort of saddens me, and in fact, as I think about the seeds of More Than Blue,
mhm,
is that even in the context, even in the wake of having very effective tools to mitigate suffering. We have tools to get patients well that if we look at what happens on the other side of identifying patients who are ill, how many of those patients, frankly, don't get access to care,
Mm.
don't get well. It was very disheartening. And I
Yeah.
decided that it was really important to do something to see if we could increase awareness and hence optimize the likelihood that patients who had not gotten access to care previously might get access to care, and that we would break down some barriers that had gotten in the way for those patients getting care previously.
Absolutely. How I hear you, that frustrating part that you know that people don't have to suffer and that they can get help, and you have the tools literally in your hands. And there's still this really big challenge to get the information out to people so they know what could be going on for themselves, and also out to providers. This seems to be the hardest lift at this point is to get the information out there.
Right. We are really interested in what those obstacles are,
Mm,
because we know almost across America, screening for depression, both during pregnancy and during the postpartum period, that's become standard fare. And yet we have consistent research now, multiple studies that show that on the other side of identifying women who have mood and anxiety disorders during pregnancy or the postpartum period, it's actually a very small percentage of those patients that actually will access care.
mm,
And even if they access care, if you look down the road, let's say 3 to 6 months, the number of those patients who are actually well, who recover, is very small. And that was, in my mind,
oh, it's
in
so
the area
sad.
of postpartum depression. I thought the implications of incompletely treated or untreated postpartum depression was so great that we had to do something to knock down stigma if that
Mhm,
was the issue, if patients just felt embarrassed about getting care
mhm,
or saying that they were isolated, alone, feeling unwell, that we had to do something to make the number of women getting care greater. And then also doing the most that we could do to educate our colleagues about the
right.
tools that we have to get patients well. Again, whether those are pharmacologic or non pharmacologic interventions.
So you said that all of this was part of the seeds of making More Than Blue, like coming up with the idea. You are the mind behind this documentary. When you were first thinking about making this documentary, what were some of the things on your sort of checklist that you wanted to make sure to include?
I remember very well being asked about 5 or 6 years ago what I felt was unfinished business in terms of my career, what
Mm,
I felt I still wanted to do. And when I looked at the data on the number of women with postpartum depression who were not getting treated or who were getting incompletely treated, I felt that it was really important to do something to make that situation better. I thought so long and hard about where I wanted this documentary to take the viewer. And I remember I didn't have to think too hard
mhm,
actually about it. And after speaking to literally thousands of patients across my career, what impressed me way past the data, we all knew that postpartum mood and anxiety disorders were highly prevalent, but in the stories of patients, on the other side of making the diagnosis of postpartum depression, it made such an impression on me how lonely patients were, how
mm,
isolated patients felt who
mm,
were experiencing postpartum mood or anxiety disorders. And it felt different than other patients that I see in my clinic because even though I'm a perinatal psychiatrist and a perinatal psychopharmacologist, I maintain a full clinic in general outpatient psychiatry and specifically outpatient psychopharmacology with a focus on mood and anxiety disorders. And there was something different about postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. And when I would speak with a new mom who was suffering, and the most common presentation might be mixed anxiety and
mm,
depression. So
mm,
depression with commingling of anxiety symptoms. I was so impressed with how lonely that patient felt,
mm,
as if she was the only person on the planet who was having that. And yet I knew that she wasn't because the prevalence data speak that this is an extremely common illness. This is a very common dilemma. But
mhm,
speaking to Susan or Mary or Sandrea or whoever, it became very apparent to me that in the moment, a new mom experiencing those symptoms was feeling very alone. And I wanted to do something to make that patient feel less lonely. And then also to let both patients and colleagues know that postpartum psychiatric illness was exquisitely treatable. We had really effective tools to get patients well. If you ask me what the most important message is of More Than Blue, it was that on the other side of postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, we can get patients that treatment, whether it was non-pharmacologic or pharmacologic, could result in getting patients well. Because I am saddened when I talk to patients who have suffered for a long period of time. We know that on the other side of treatment, it can be a while before we actually get patients well. And I always feel badly, Kat, when a mom will tell me that she suffered for a year, and even
Yeah.
with treatment, that the duration of time before
Yeah.
she was actually feeling well and
Mhm.
empowered, it could
Mhm.
be a year, it could be
Totally.
18 months. And moms will sort of mourn the experience of not having joy
Yep.
during that interval.
Yep.
And I thought that with More Than Blue, we had an opportunity to both put it right out there and have women tell their stories. I thought that we could finish by women also sharing the stories of recovery, of their
Mhm.
path to wellness. And I
Mhm.
thought that last part had been incompletely described in anything that I had seen previously. And that was
Right.
really the catalyst for making and then finishing More Than Blue.
Yeah, and you talked, I think it's personally, I think it's important for people to understand or hear a little bit about the process of making this because, as I understand it, you had a lot of people who wanted to share their story.
I am so grateful that I mentioned before that so many patients suffer in silence, that they don't want to tell their stories, that they feel the stigma associated with having these symptoms during a time that's portrayed by the media and
Yep.
other platforms as being so perfect. And
Mhm.
in fact, that's really how we start More Than Blue by some of the folks who tell their stories
Mhm.
sharing that they had this sort of one impression about what being a new mom might be like, and then it
Mhm.
turned out to be something very different. And in fact, at that distance, that gulf was their postpartum mood or anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
And I felt that it was very important to reach out to see if we could identify women who would be courageous enough to tell their story. And we did that using womensmentalhealth.org, which is a platform that we set up well over 20 years ago when there was very sparse information, let alone a digital format, so that whether you were a mom in Iowa or a family in the Bronx, or you were a clinician on either side of America or around the world, we were interested in providing the best information possible so
Mhm.
that patients could make informed decisions, partnering with whether it was a doula, a nurse practitioner, a psychiatrist, a psychologist. We have such a sense of the spectrum of clinicians in the community who are involved in perinatal mental health care, and they come at it perhaps a little differently, or in my mind, our work complements each other's. And we put out there a request on womensmentalhealth.org that if you were willing to tell your story, fill out this digital interest form. And Kat, we got over 375 responses to one ask.
That's
And it
amazing.
was actually my task and that of my incredible team to go through those stories and to talk to patients, frankly, whether they were in the Bronx or in rural Idaho. And it was amazing to read what they actually even just put on the interest form to get a
Mhm.
sense of the texture of that story, to see ultimately what we could weave into a
Mhm.
coherent story of postpartum depression in America, both the faces and voices of that discomfort, and also their respective paths to wellness.
So that's a lot of stories to read through. And as you mentioned before, you've seen thousands of people. What was that like? Did you get any sense of, I don't know, different presentations or different ways that postpartum depression is affecting people or their understanding of it in different parts of the country?
Every patient has her own story, and also every family where a patient has postpartum depression. I was so grateful not just to the patients who participated to tell their stories, but also their partners. And we included in More Than Blue. I felt really strongly that this was not just about Mrs. Jones' story about her postpartum depression, that it was so important to get her partner included in More Than Blue. And we did. And a woman who had postpartum depression, and also a woman who had actually one of the most severe forms of postpartum psychiatric illness, postpartum psychosis. I remember so vividly this husband sharing how scared he was as he saw his wife get so ill in front of him so quickly in the acute period postpartum. As you can tell, as you listen to me tell this story, I'm so grateful not only to the women who were willing to tell their stories, but to their partners who also had the courage to share the impact of postpartum psychiatric illness on their partnerships and actually on their families and the
Mm.
concerns that they shared about the trajectory. These were young couples making a major life decision to have a family, and on the other side of that, to be faced with a very significant issue like postpartum depression, or as in one of the stories, postpartum psychosis.
One thing I was really grateful to see in this documentary is that there was a wide range of experiences, but like clinically, but also a wide range of representation, which I haven't seen a lot of in a lot of documentary form type things. It's really not enough of women of color have been shown or stories have been shared in this kind of format. And it seemed like there were many stories shared in this documentary, and I was really glad to see that it was diverse.
When we started this project, I remember vividly telling our production team that this was not going to be just a bunch of patients on the East Coast of America, that we were going to go geographically diverse and that we were going to go ethnically and racially diverse. And again, I was heartened and I learned more and more about what the experience was for two women of color. In fact, two black sisters
Mm.
who were in More Than Blue, willing to tell their story of postpartum depression, and so that we can destigmatize postpartum depression, the experience and opportunities to get treatment. It was my goal so that we could put it out there. And we did that for other racial and ethnic groups. I thought it was very important to start to tell that story. We know that there are greater rates of perinatal psychiatric illness in marginalized samples of patients and in women of color. And we have just incompletely told that story. And so I wanted that to be at least part of the story of More Than Blue, to actually start that conversation or to keep that conversation going, because it frankly has been sidelined and I wanted to bring it front and center. And so I was particularly grateful to Andrea and Janae in More Than Blue when they agreed to tell their story. And they told it individually, and they also told it in the context of the group in which they participated and in which we filmed during the movie.
Yeah, I was really touched by their stories and their connection together. And to your point earlier, showing that that's how this can affect a family, not just when one person is dealing with it, but certainly there are some components of these conditions having some factors, genetic components being risk factors. If somebody in your family experienced it or a parent did, you have a more likelihood of experiencing it as well. But for them to be going through it at similar times was also really powerful, and just their connection was beautiful too.
Thanks. I think it's one of the strongest parts of the film, and I've enjoyed, frankly, getting to know them a little bit on the other side of our filming. And I hope that they may continue to tell their story as we take More Than Blue on the road across the country for various screenings. We've started to do that, and they've been kind enough to join us for some of those screenings.
Oh, that's amazing. And yeah, I definitely want to talk about how people can see this documentary in a bit. But before we get to that, you had to go through lots and lots of applications and stories. How did you come to choose some of the stories that you did?
We were so lucky to have so many stories to choose from. One of the questions that the production team grappled with was, do we do this just about postpartum major depression, or do we also include postpartum psychosis, which is one of the most serious forms of postpartum psychiatric illness and makes it to the news headlines and is frequently associated with very bad outcomes either for mom and or her children. Those stories are frequently what ends up on the evening news across America or on the cover of Time magazine. I felt it was very important that we actually include a story of postpartum psychosis. And I thought that we could clarify that although postpartum psychosis may not be that common, it occurs somewhere between 1 and 2 in 1,000 births in America. It may not be common, but it's not unimportant if it's your wife or your sister or your niece. And so I made the decision that we would include it. And we were so lucky to partner with a patient now recovered who had, frankly, a relatively classic case of postpartum psychosis.
Mm,
And she was willing to tell her story of getting ill and of getting hospitalized and getting treated and getting well, and actually how the experience of postpartum psychosis had her pivot from the job that she was doing in the past to really being a very significant advocate in the postpartum psychiatric illness space. So I'm so grateful to her for her willingness to tell the story. But I think it was a really important decision to fold in postpartum psychosis. And I'm grateful also to partner with our colleagues at Postpartum Support International, where I sit on the postpartum psychosis task force, where PSI has also made the decision to shed an even greater light on postpartum psychosis because it can be devastating.
right.
And we should identifying those women who are at greatest risk for postpartum psychosis. And we should see also that our colleagues in the community know how to treat it when patients become ill. It's one of the reasons that we started the MGH Postpartum Psychosis Project, which is, to my knowledge, the largest registry of women in the world who've had histories of postpartum psychosis,
Mhm.
and where we study these patients to learn the most that we can so that we can identify those women at greatest risk and see that they get treated if they become ill, and that we also partner with our colleagues in the community so that they have the tools, the knowledge that they need to manage one of the most, if not the most serious postpartum psychiatric illness out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, and having heard from some postpartum psychosis survivors as well, how important it is for them also to be included and not be left out because it are like what you were saying before, there's the full story isn't that it's just the bad outcomes. Many women who suffer with this don't have that outcome, but they're suffering nonetheless. And when you're already in a sort of a diagnostic category that has so much stigma and so much misunderstanding, it's really important to see the fuller spectrum of what that actually can be like.
On the other side of More Than Blue, I made the decision to do, on a very small scale, something that would also put a postpartum psychiatric illness like postpartum psychosis out there so that there would be greater awareness and hopefully that more patients would get treatment. And I was so humbled to get the Susan Hickman Award from Postpartum Support International about a
Mhm.
year and a half ago and decided to take the small award and see if I could do something pretty similar to what we had done with More Than Blue in terms of this reaching out for people with stories about their postpartum psychiatric experience, but specifically with the focus being on postpartum psychosis. And
Mhm.
again, we were flooded with people willing to tell their stories about postpartum psychosis. And now we're just on the cusp of finishing what will be probably a YouTube video or a variation on a theme about the stories of postpartum psychosis. And this is actually across the world, women
Mhm.
from Australia, some women in America. We just dropped the trailer a week ago on reflections of postpartum psychosis.
Mm.
And I was so heartened that within the first 36 hours, we had over 7,500 views of the
Oh,
trailer. And
amazing.
so, Kat, I think that what that told me was we had an opportunity and we have an opportunity with More Than Blue.
Mm.
And we have using with much less resources, whether you're talking about a YouTube video or a webinar, we have opportunities to continue to destigmatize postpartum psychiatric illness, and particularly our most severe postpartum psychiatric illness, postpartum psychosis. And I was really surprised the next morning when I looked at the analytics and saw that we had literally thousands of views of the trailer, and we had put it up on Instagram
Amazing.
the lunchtime before.
Amazing. I'll be sure to include that link in the show notes for our
That
episode too, so
would
people
be
can
great.
find it.
It's on Instagram and Facebook, and actually we have and a standalone link as well.
Oh, awesome. I will connect that to this so people can find it. So I love how in this you are. You're so clearly passionate about it. To be doing this for 30 plus years, as you've said, and continuing to innovate, continuing to expand and think about how can you get this information out to other people. It's clear that you are dedicated and yes, a lot. And you've researched a lot and studied a lot and taken care of a lot of people, but it you can do all of those things, but if you don't really, if you're not really in there and care the way that you do, it just doesn't hit the same way. And I can really feel that with you and the work that you do. It's amazing.
Thanks, Kat. We round as a group, as we have for the last 30 years, every Wednesday at midday for lunch. Our clinical staff, our research staff, we come together and we talk about cases, challenging cases that we're seeing through the clinic. I think one of the reasons I've stayed at Mass General my entire career is it's a place where clinical care informs the research that we do, and then our research findings inform what we bring back to patients. And that crosstalk is something that I found is somewhat unique at Mass General. And every Wednesday when we round and my colleagues and I present cases, I always learn something. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the exciting things about postpartum mood and anxiety disorders and this work in perinatal mental health is that I think we're continuing to learn really important aspects of something that is extremely prevalent in the lives of patients and continuing to identify tools to mitigate suffering. And I am excited about it. And I'm excited, frankly, about staying in it longer because I think we're not done. And if,
Right.
to come full circle to More Than Blue, More Than Blue was a new space that I thought we could move forward in and and to increase awareness. I didn't make reference. I'm so grateful to my colleagues who joined me, my
Mhm.
colleagues who are researchers, clinicians, teachers in the advocacy space, the PSI folks, that we were able to come together and do this film. And hopefully, more patients will feel comfortable getting treatment, and then we'll take advantage of treatments that get them well. I'm still optimistic and excited about this work and hope to continue to do it.
It's amazing. And what I also love is that with More Than Blue, there's the way that it's being distributed is also another way to have people be involved. Can you say a little bit about what the plan is right now?
Yes. I thought so much about on the other side when we got a final cut, and you think, I'm a perinatal psychopharmacologist by training, not necessarily a filmmaker. I came to that later. I thought you finish a film and you're done, but you're not done because it only in the current environment, there is so much out there. I wanted to make sure that More Than Blue did not get lost. And so I made the decision that we would do a dissemination campaign and that we would do screenings hopefully in the next 6 to 9 months, but particularly the next 6 months across America.
Mhm.
And we're going to be showing More Than Blue at the annual meeting of Postpartum Support International, which is a very widely attended meeting with people with all different backgrounds who are involved in perinatal mental health care across the country, actually, and across the world. And my hope was that we could be doing screenings over this next 6 months, particularly to increase awareness of the film. And at that point, probably get it on one of the larger streaming platforms. But I made the decision that just to get it on a streaming platform and have it get too easily lost, given the volume of material that's on those platforms,
Right.
so that we're going to we're going to show it in New Orleans in July, but then I hope that's just the beginning and that people will reach out to our partner and to our group to see that the film gets shown, whether you're in a local library in Arkansas or whether you're in downtown Los Angeles or in northern New England. And so that's my hope for More Than Blue.
So people will be able to, like people in the community or whoever's able and willing, will be able to hold screenings themselves. Like I could hold one and invite people. Is that part? Yeah.
So we're actually figuring out sort of the distribution policy and actually
Mhm,
the mechanism for
mhm,
doing screenings. But my goal with More Than Blue is to frankly put it out there as widely as possible
mm,
and after a relatively brief period of time find a way that lands on one of the streamers. But I felt that it was premature to put it on one of the streamers
mhm,
until a critical mass of folks had seen it. We've already screened it in Boston and New York City, and
mm.
we'll be in Los Angeles in a few months. But we needed to do better than that, and so hence we came up with the rationale for screening across the country.
So people will be able to like find out more about this on womensmentalhealth.org, that there will be
Exactly.
some way for them to get that information on how they
Exactly.
can see it or participate in some way.
Yes.
That's really exciting.
I've learned so much from listening to patients, and I learned so much from the women who were willing to tell their stories in More Than Blue in this film about the faces and voices of postpartum depression in America. And I hope that the film makes it easier for patients to tell their stories to their primary care physician, to their nurse midwife, to their psychologist, social worker, whoever that person is. Because I think if we lower the burden in terms of people feeling comfortable telling their stories, I think that's going to optimize the likelihood that that patient gets care and then gets treated. And then if they get treated to wellness, that's my hope for More Than Blue.
Amazing. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I hope the same for the film. And I'm just really grateful that you've taken the time to come on to talk about this today and share the work that you're doing. It's so inspiring. And I'm really excited for this project, this film to get out there, because having seen it, I feel like it will have that impact that you want it to have. It's really powerful.
Yeah, thanks a million for asking me to do this today.
Absolutely. Make sure that you stay connected to the developments of More Than Blue and its distribution at womensmentalhealth.org. You can also go to their Instagram page at MGHCWMH, on Facebook, MGH Women's Mental Health, where you can find out more information about how this film is being distributed and how you might be able to participate. If you haven't yet subscribed or followed this podcast, please go do that. And while you're on your favorite listening platform, leave a review about what you feel and what you think about this podcast so that other people who are looking for this resource know that they're in the right place. I thank you so much for joining us today. Until next time.